I've always been a fearless person, always. I remember my mother telling me when I was 2 years old that she asked me to go get some diapers for my little brother, and I told her, with my hand on my hip, "That's your baby, you get it yourself." And so that fearlessness took me to walking in the streets of New York in wee hours in the morning, to going to Jamaica, duct taping hundreds of thousands of dollars on my body, to selling kilos of cocaine with the Mexican cartel, which ultimately landed me in federal prison. I didn't know that this one trait of fearlessness would lead me on a journey that would change the course of my life and ultimately hundreds of girls in the process. And so I think back to my childhood. My parents, they beautiful? They were franchise business owners, have been married over 50 years to date, and they wanted to provide the best opportunities for my siblings and myself to succeed in a world in which they knew would be stacked against us. And so they thought by giving us the so-called American dream, the big house with the pool in the backyard and the white neighbors, would make things better, right? It wasn't that simple. And so when I left the protection of the suburbs and went to college in Baltimore City, things were not so black and white. And so in 1994, I remember walking onto the campus of historically black Morgan State University. And I remember being so excited when I saw the sea of beautiful faces that looked just like me. And I remember a young man saying to me, "You sound like you're white. Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from New York." "Well, you sound white." And I'm like, "Well, what did that mean?" And I was confused. And so I began to try and sound like what I thought I was supposed to sound like, black. And then I started venturing off campus into the city, hanging out, going to all the hot spots, being young, naive, what college students do. And so I remember just feeling so powerful from the attention that I received. And so this went on for years, and I stumbled into a lifestyle that most people see on television shows and in music videos. And yeah, I was working, and I was in school, and, on and off, and I was a down chick, side chick, main chick's chick. And I went from sitting pretty in the passenger seat to now wanting to drive the car. And I thought, if they're doing it, why can't I? And so I did. And so this went on for years, and then in 2005, I remember receiving a phone call to come to New Jersey. And I went, and when I got there, it was 50 kilos of cocaine. And I wasn't afraid. And so every week, like clockwork, they came for a year, until one fateful day, a homeboy of mine calls and says, "I was just robbed for 5 keys, and that was about $100,000. And I remember saying, "Look, my dude, that's not my problem, that's yours." And I never saw him again. But I did receive a phone call. "Yo, you need to leave town. Your boy paid me to kill you. But I don't kill women or children, but I don't know what he'll do." And so I left. And soon after, I was arrested, but no jail time. And I had vowed that I wouldn't do anything or be around anyone that remotely looked like my past. And so I moved to Harlem. I started working. I always had a job, but I started another job. And I started a business. And everything seemed good, but yet again, it's not that simple. And so I fast forward to 2012, and I find myself caught in a sting operation in Richmond, Virginia, on federal drug conspiracy charges. And I thought, like every other time, I was going to get through this until the judge says, "No bail. You're a drug queenpin and a threat to society. And so I knew I would be in jail until I either A, decided to go to trial and fight my case, or B, take a guilty plea. And so this is where the real journey began. And so I was housed in a small county jail in Hanover, Virginia, Pamunkey Regional Jail. And I remember seeing the same women come in and leave, never to come back and be told that they had overdosed. And then I decided it was time for me to really start asking questions and find out what was going on. And so for the 3 to 5 hours a day that they let us out the cells, I asked some of the women, could I interview them? And I started going to NA meetings and asking questions because I thought that people who used drugs did it because they wanted to, and that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and that they knew what drugs were doing, so they had choices, right? Until I heard the tragic stories like, my dad was raping me, and he gave me the heroin and told me to take it and the pain will go away. Or the only time I was able to spend time with my mother was when we smoked crack together. And the stories came, and I cried, and I could not believe what I contributed to. And my spirit was convicted, and I woke up. And so I decided to take a guilty plea because, in fact, I was guilty. And I prayed to God, and I asked God for forgiveness, and I forgave myself, and I knew I was redeemed. And so I was sentenced and off to federal prison. And so the most horrific experience of my incarceration was the transport. And I can remember being handcuffed and shackled and telling the guard that the shackles were too tight and they made it tighter. And to this day, I still have scars. And I remember seeing about 50 buses out at the airlift filled with prisoners from all around the country that needed to be transported to Oklahoma to the Federal Transfer Center. And the marshals had their guns pointed at us. And I remember going on the plane and asking, are you going to take these cuffs off? And the marshal laughed at me and he said, you're property of the federal government. You don't ask questions. And so when you think of a plane, you have first class in the front, coach in the back. The women sat in the front, and the men sat in the back. And so if the women had to go to the restroom, we went to the back of the plane. And so, of course, I had to go. And so I remember sliding down in handcuffs and shackles. And I remember some of the men groping on me. And I remember telling them to stop. And I remember the officer standing behind me telling me not to talk to them and watching them continue to grope on me. And I thought, how could another woman allow this? And I went into that bathroom and I cried like I had never cried before in my life. And so you may wonder why I'm standing here right now telling you this story and telling my story to a room full of strangers. I'm sharing my story because it's the same tragedies, traumas, and experiences that every formerly incarcerated woman goes through when she's applying for a job, trying to get housing, or even trying to go back to school. Asked to tell her story to a reporter, or to lend her voice to a conference panel for authenticity. But my story was not like Santra Rucker, who was sentenced to 13 life sentences in federal prison, has been in almost 20 years right now for a first-time nonviolent drug offense, who left her 2-year-old daughter, Kendia Riley. Alice Johnson, who too was sentenced to federal prison for life without the possibility of parole for a first-time nonviolent drug offense, conspiracy. Michelle West, who was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 50 years, plus an additional 10 years supervised release, as if, right? She's been incarcerated now 25 years, or 26 years, I believe, for a first-time drug conspiracy, and also left her child, Mikel West. And so from the day of my redemption, I knew that it was my mission and purpose from God to create and build platforms for women, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, to use their voice and create change. And so I started the Ladies of Hope Ministries, an organization that helps marginalized and disenfranchised women and girls. And tomorrow, we are opening Hope House in the Bronx. A safe housing space for women and girls. And I've had the distinct pleasure of traveling around this country alongside Andrea James, the Executive Director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and met brilliant women all over this country. And a 2017 Soros Justice Fellow working on parole and probation accountability, which is a whole nother TED Talk, and it looks like I'm already out of time, but so I just want to give you a little context on, usually I don't stand and talk about the degradation and humiliation that I went through, but instead I talk about the brilliant women that I've met who were incarcerated just like me. Women like LaShawna Thompson, who's right here in DC and formed The Wire, Teresa Hodge, DC, Mission Launch, Sarita Steib Martin, New Orleans, Operation Restoration, Fox Rich, Fox Motors, New Orleans, Donna Hilton and Susan Burton. You all should know who they are. Michelle Jones, incarcerated 20 years in Indiana State Prison, has been home 2 months and is a doctoral student at NYU. Dolores Canales, Kendia Riley, you saw Sandra Walker, that's her daughter. She's a student at University of Virginia. And Sarah Zarber, a student in the School of Social Work at Columbia University. The children of incarcerated parents, Ebony Underwood and Miko Underwood. Both of their their father, William Underwood, has been incarcerated first time, nonviolent conspiracy charge, over 28 years. Susan Rosenberg and her partner, Dawn Reel, and my little black friend, Stella. I always call her my little black friend. And again, Susan Rosenberg and Laura Whitehorn, who are both political prisoners of war and are fighting for political prisoners still in this country, and Lois Ahrens, who is not formally incarcerated but has been doing this work through Real Cost of Prisons Project for 50 years, and she stands beside us. Shonda and her daughter, Jam. Shonda is the most brilliant research assistant and data specialist. Tara and Sue from Washington State, and Ivy, who I was incarcerated with in Danbury, Project Liberation. Trey Johns, director of Black and Pink. Amy Pova, Can Do Clemency. Since her release and clemency from President Clinton, she has worked 16 years to free prisoners around this country. Tahiba Bain and Layla Martinez, both students, Layla in the School of GS, and has a Beyond the Box initiative where she's trying to remove not only the box on college applications at Columbia University, but also statewide in New York, or nationwide, actually. My sister's from YWCF in California. I'm going to rush through these slides now because time's up. North Carolina and Alaska, sisters all over this country. Sisters from Dallas, Celeste has her own business, Save My Edges, entrepreneur, patent holder. My Just Leadership sisters, who are doing amazing work around this country. And so today, right now, in this very moment, I stand for every formerly incarcerated woman in this world, turning the pages on our past. And we have used our experiences to triumph and to do amazing work that God wants us to do. And so I urge you to continue to help us fight and our feet to end the incarceration of women and girls. Free her. Thank you. Thank you.